results in Abia and Enugu State. It was suspended due to the fact that people said that there were attempts to actually thwart the presidential election, the gubernatorial election rather. And we also seen even in Lagos State Labour Party candidates all putting forward against the ethnicity or the bigotry of the gubernatorial elections. Is really going to be a tough season in Nigeria.
We're looking forward to it. But the good thing is that there's a time frame for the courts to decide, before the inauguration. So we'll be looking at that during the course of the program. But first, let's begin in Kenya, where opposition supporters recently organized protests over the high cost of living and demanding the resignation of President William Ruto. During the demonstration, several protesters and 3 Kenyan legislators were arrested but were subsequently released. Opposition leader Raila Odinga participated in the protests and announced that they would be held weekly until either the president resigns or the cost of living decreases.
The police dispersed Odinga's motorcade with tear gas several times, and in retaliation, his supporters threw stones at them. Odinga claimed that his vehicle was shot at by the police, and his party spokesperson posted a photo of a shattered windshield online. According to Nairobi's police chief, Adamson Bungei, the legislators who were arrested have been released and are scheduled to appear in court on Thursday to face unspecified charges. And now joining us for this conversation, we have Maliba Arnold, a public policy analyst. He joins us from Nairobi, Kenya. We also have Honorable Maina Karobia, a member of Parliament, East African Legislative Assembly. Thank you so much for joining us on the conversation. All right, if you can hear me, Maina, I mean, how would you describe the political landscape in Kenya currently, and how does this actually relate to the ongoing protests we have seen so far?
Thank you very much for hosting me for this discussion. I must say that whatever we are seeing from the opposition is actually not new in our politics. It is actually barely 6 months ago that the leader of opposition was actually justifying the reason as to why there is cost of living. Remember, the reason as to why he found it politically correct to justify the high cost of living in Kenya was because he was in a handshake with the former president, that is Uhuru Kenyatta. But as of now, because there is a new administration, an administration that won the election against him, he is now using the current economic challenges that we are having as a country to win political conversations, and those political, he is actually using the economic hardships that we are having in our country to incite citizens for political benefit on his side. But be that as it may, I must say that this is a global challenge. It's only that he is using the economic challenge that the world is facing from a Kenyan perspective to whip emotions for his political benefit. He has been talking also about the electoral issues that led to his losing. Remember, the Kenyan elections were very, very transparent, and the electoral agency was actually following a 2017 judgment in regards to how elections should be conducted in Kenya. And the judgment of 2017 was that Form 34Bs are going to form the tally, the ultimate tally of the presidential results. And the tallying is going to be done right at the basic electoral unit in Kenya, and that is the polling station. So if one wants, even you in whichever country you are in right now, actually you can, if you want to know the elections or the results of Kenyan leaders, right from the lowest governance level, that is county assembly position, up to the president position, you can get those results on the electoral agency portal. And Raila Odinga is requesting or is demanding for the opening of server. Server is nowhere else but on the IEBC portal. In fact, if I was to advise him or if I was to help him in terms of advocating of opening of server, he should be requesting the government to roll out the 5G network so that his demonstrators or his supporters can get the results. The results are any person in whichever part of the world can get the results of Kenyan leaders that were transmitted by the electoral agency in August last year, and they are on the IEBC portal.
Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Karobia. I'd like to bring in, stay with you, Honorable Karobia. Now, you've talked about Raila Odinga and the protests. Now, let's look at the person. How does Raila Odinga's involvement in the protests affect the political calculus in Kenya? And what does this say about his ambitions? Because it's saying after the Supreme Court has decided that President William Ruto is the legitimate president of Kenya, it's saying, look, a whistleblower did mention something, and you know he wants to check the servers and all of that. What do you make of him doing all those things and the timing of it?
The timing is actually very wrong. In fact, I agree with you that you are the first person to ask about the timing. I've been hosted by Kenyan journalists, and none of them is talking about the timing of this protest. Remember, the last time we did the election in Kenya was in August. How come he is complaining 8 months after the verdict was delivered by the Kenyan people on the ballot and also by the Supreme Court? It defeats the purpose of him complaining about the electoral issues that happened in August. Because indeed, you cannot be complaining 8 months. And I appreciate the fact that you are actually questioning the justification and the justification of him bringing protest and election being an issue 8 months after the declaration of his results by the electoral agency, and also the subsequent confirmation by the Supreme Court. I think it defeats the purpose in terms of timing, in terms of legality of whatever he is trying to present to Kenyan people. It is actually time barred. Maybe what he should be talking of is maybe the economic issues. But then, is it politically correct to even talk about the economic issues in Kenya when 6 months ago he was actually trying to justify the administration that was supporting his candidature? So really, the question of the legitimacy of this current government, it is not upon him to decide. The legitimacy of this government was decided by Kenyans. The legitimacy of this government was confirmed by the Supreme Court, which is the most powerful court on the land in Kenya. And we have seen even the international community embrace the ruling that was done by the Supreme Court. We have seen international community actually appreciate the peaceful and the transparent manner in which the elections in Kenya were conducted.
Okay. Now, Honorable Karobia, still looking at these issues. Now, still looking at the issues, I mean, aside the illegitimacy that Raila Odinga is claiming against William Ruto, you would agree that this protest arising from economic and social factors. I mean, we had talks about the high taxes going on in Kenya, and William Ruto, upon ascension to the position, he said that he will be able within 100 days to deal with some issues affecting Kenyans, especially the economy. So how do you think this protest will affect the administration of William Ruto going forward?
I must say that the people who are conducting these demonstrations are actually a minority in our country. But on Monday, I was on the streets of Nairobi, just doing an observation of how people are flocking to the street in terms of demonstrations. You'll be surprised that people are not on the streets from morning up to 4 p.m. The demonstrators were not on the street. People came to join the streets out of the excitement when Raila Odinga left a 5-star hotel. He was enjoying 5-star treatment in a hotel in Nairobi, and then he joins people on the. He goes out of the hotel, starts mobilizing people on the streets on the lower eastern, on the eastern part of Nairobi, to now join him on the street, and now he was moving towards now the town. But I can say that largely in Nairobi on Monday, people didn't come out of the streets as expected. He just observed that the numbers were low, and now he left his hotel to go and try to mobilize people on the Lower Eastern, where people are readily available to protest. But be that as it may, the Kenyan people are ready to build their country. The Kenyan people that support this administration are the majority. Really, the president, His Excellency William Ruto, doesn't have a challenge of politics in Kenya. The challenge that William Ruto is waking up to answer to is a question of the economy, not the question of politics of demonstrations. Because he knew, or he knows, that he was given a mandate by Kenyans through a transparent process. He presented a manifesto to the Kenyan people. He knows that in the next election, he will not be presenting a manifesto to Kenyan people. He will actually be presenting a scorecard. As recent as today, the president was actually ringing a bell in the Nairobi Stock Exchange today. And he talked about that he looks forward to a day that Kenyans will not be demonstrating on the streets for by political mobilizers and political operatives. But Kenyans will be going to the streets to celebrate the high level of engagement at the Nairobi Stock Exchange. We better have a conversation of how Nairobi Stock Exchange is faring, rather than people complaining about how they were defeated, how they have a mysterious whistleblower who cannot even be courageous enough to appear on a court of law.
Now, Honorable Karobia, still talking about the situation in Kenya, I do know that in the advent of his administration, President William Ruto did talk about government of unity. He did extend the olive branch to Raila Odinga, but he hasn't been that elder statesman. He hasn't accepted the hand of friendship and saying, look, let's review this country together. And looking at the current situation of things, he did say that this protest will go on every Monday, and that's disruptive to the very economy that is trying to protest and say the cost of living is high. So to what extent these protests represent a challenge to President William Ruto's government, and how might it affect his ability to govern? Because it's very destructive, and then you also need to keep law and order. And if you're too hard on the opposition, things might just blow out of proportion. So it's a very dicey situation in Kenya as we speak.
Indeed, it's a tricky situation from an administrative or from a governance level. But then I must say that for a person to rise from a position of member of parliament 30 years ago, and now become the president of the Republic of Kenya, that is a person who can handle all manner of challenges. William Ruto has moved from being in government to being in the opposition and then moving back to government. So he knows how to govern a nation. He has the experience. So for me, I might look at, for me and you, we might look at it from a point of a governance challenge. But a person who has risen from the leader of a member of parliament to the level of a president, really this is a person who has gone through all the processes of leadership, and he knows how to tackle this situation. Then I must say that the challenge that we have in Africa, let me comment generally from an African perspective, okay. And I know even Nigeria, you're having this situation. The challenge in Africa is that when people are defeated or they lose an election, they are not bold enough to accept results. Even when the process is fair, even when the results can be quantified. There are democracies that are advanced, and there are also some loose democracies or weak democracies where a person loses an election and he or she just goes home and waits for the next election cycle. And you give the person who has been given the mandate by the people to govern. But to a large extent, Africans are not courageous enough to accept the results. I admire the American democracy where a president loses an election and you just go home. A presidential candidate loses an election and you just go home. Give the other person a chance, the opportunity to govern. Because a country cannot be on campaign mode from
Honorable Karobia, can you hear us?
1 p.m. or from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. We need to move on as a country. There is a lot to learn. Cultural involvement from a political perspective that has to be done in Africa, where a person loses an election and that person accepts that he has been defeated, that his manifesto was not persuasive enough, and he or she waits for the next time to talk to the citizens. I want to urge people who lose elections to please move on.
Okay.
We have an economy to build as Africans. We have a people to govern. Those people who have been bestowed with the responsibility to govern. People who lose should give them the space to govern so that at least we can move forward. And this is the cultural, the political, cultural behavior or manner that we need to adopt as Africans. Otherwise, if we engage in the politics of backbiting 24/7, year in, year out, until the next election cycle, even the person who has been given the mandate to govern will not be concentrating with issues of economic development.
Now,
They
Honorable
will only be answering to the political challenges that are arising with the protest and what have you. That's my take.
All right, now, Honorable Karobia, while you say that people should move on, you're employing for peace and unity. Of course, you also know that there is supposed to be a freedom of expression, which brings about protest. When people are displeased about a certain way the government is doing things, they go into negotiations or protests to display their displeasure. Now, from the reports that we're seeing, about 238 people have been arrested in this protest. We also have reports of legislators who have been arrested and then released. So do you not see this as a state repression of dissent? I mean, looking at Kenya's history, how would you react to the police handling of this protest?
You see, my dear sister, the Kenyan constitution is very sound. The Kenyan constitution is one of the best, I think, in the world in terms of freedoms and rights and privileges of private citizens. But that particular freedom is abused in terms of expression, in terms of assembling, where people now go to the point of vandalizing properties, both public and private. You see, right now as we speak here, my right of expression and your right of expression stops at the point of where I infringe your point or your right of expression. Kenyan people have a right to express themselves, have a right to assemble at a particular point and at any point and at any time. But that right stops the point where a politician mobilizes people to go and vandalize the shops and other enterprises. So I know journalists or the media was not candid enough to cover areas where these demonstrators or protesters were destroying property. They just walk along the road and what Raila Odinga was talking about. But then, along those demonstrations, you could see people running to shops, destroying properties, vandalizing even roads. And I will not be mean or economic with words. If somebody destroys properties, they should be arrested. Whether you are Raila Odinga or whether you are the lowest class of a citizen in Kenya, if there is any classification of a citizen. Any person who vandalizes, any person who incites citizens to go on the road and protest, and those citizens start vandalizing and destroying properties, that particular leader should be arrested.
So there should be a balance between civil liberties.
In Kenya, even we have seen even in US, the people who are ransacking, I think the Capitol building in US, those people have been brought those citizens might be brought to book still. When you have a constitution, everybody serves that constitution. There's no person who is above the law.
Now, Honourable Karobia, before we begin to wrap up our conversation, I do agree with what you said. There should be a balance between civil liberties and law and order. Now, this has been playing out for too long. You said you can't be in campaign mood for almost a year, since August. The Supreme Court has decided, you said if the losers don't accept the position, you won't even allow the president to govern. So how do you see this playing out? What's your prediction for the future of the protest in the wider political situation in Kenya? And what factors do you think will be the most important in shaping this outcome?
My view is that, and this is my view generally, not only in Kenya, but in every democracy. If you have elected representatives, in Kenya's case, or Kenyan perspective, we have senators, we have members of parliament, we have what we call members of county assembly, both in ordinarily in some jurisdictions are called councils. If you have issues, pertinent issues, political, economic, or social, and even cultural, present your matters, present your cases to the leaders that you elected. The biggest responsibility of any legislator, any parliamentarian, is to represent the people that elected that person. So the voice of the people are the leaders who are elected. So indeed, the people who are demonstrating, you quoted some MPs were arrested on Monday. Those particular MPs, other than going to the streets, they should offer leadership and present the issues that they have from their protesters' perspective in Parliament or in the Senate. That's where matters matter most. That's where key decisions, that's where legislations, that's where policies, laws are set or are actually passed. But going to the streets, nobody will listen to you. Nobody will. When you go to the street, I will just see you from a political perspective. But when you go and articulate your issues from a legal body, a lawmaking body, I'll take you serious. In fact, you'll be surprised if these opposition guys who are presenting their matters in the Senate or in the Parliament, even people who are actually supporters of the ruling party, would go and support, would actually be identifying with the issues that are presented by these opposition leaders if they do it in Parliament or in the Senate. But when you go to the street, you disrupt everyone and people start seeing you from the lenses of political benefit and political utilization of a political narratives to gain power. So I think the future, as you have asked me, the future of Kenyan decent civil liberties are well entrenched in the constitution. The government or leaders and even every Kenyan represents or appreciates the fact that people have the right to assemble and picket and present their matters. But then those issues should be done in accordance with the law. For the leaders, they should not be utilizing their position of power to incite public. Let them present these issues in institutions, and the institutions are two: Senate and Parliament. And for us in the regional assembly, that is East African community, we can have these issues presented also in the regional parliament of East African community.
Thank you very much, Honourable Maina Karobia, Member of Parliament, East African Legislative Assembly. It was a pleasure having you join us on the conversation to discuss this matter. Thank you.